Hi everyone, welcome to my channel I Like to Cake. Today I'm going to show you how to decorate a buttercream galaxy cake. Usually I would start this video by stacking the cake, but today I want to show you how I colored and marbled the cake batter first. So here I have my prepared cake batter split into 5 bowls, and I'm using 5 bowls for 5 colors, but you could just do 3 or 2 or more, whatever you want. The 5 colors I'm doing are black, bright blue, dark purple, dark blue, and bright pink. I recommend using a concentrated food coloring or gel food coloring for this because you want a pretty strong color, and with those liquidy food colorings you might end up kind of watering your batter down too much. A couple notes on the colors. I used pink, blue, and a little bit of black to get the dark purple, and then for the dark blue I just used blue and black. Now we're going to just randomly spoon out each color of batter into our prepared cake pans. This is one of the fun parts of making this cake. I just love playing around with all the colors. You can be as creative as you like, and it just looks so fun in the end. Once you've spooned out all of your batter, take a skewer and swirl the batter around to create this beautiful marbled effect. Make sure your skewer is basically touching the bottom of the pan when you do this. You want to try and swirl all of the cake batter, not just the layer on top. If you don't have a skewer, you can use anything long and skinny like a long toothpick, a cocktail stick, a silverware knife, the end of a meat thermometer, or even a chopstick. Now go ahead and bake and cool your cakes like you normally would. Now we're going to make the planets that go on top. So first you're going to need these silicone sphere molds. You can get them online, but they have different sizes, and so I had 3 different sizes that I used, but you can always just get one size and use that. And what I have here is some melted candy melts. You could also use white chocolate. I just find candy melts to be a bit easier to use for decorations like this because it hardens a little faster. You don't need to put it into the fridge to let it harden. It can just harden out at room temperature, and it won't immediately melt in your hands when you handle the finished decoration later on. Now I'm just going in with different colors. I splattered it back and forth for the first 2. I'm also dabbing it on for some of these for a different effect. You can just have fun with this, play around with it, paint it on, whatever you want to do. But when you're doing that, an important thing to keep in mind is that each of these little dimples here is going to be half of a planet. So you want to make sure that you have 2 halves that have a similar design so you can match them up later when we put them together to create the full sphere. Now I'm just going to repeat this process with the smaller sized molds. For the smallest molds that I had, I decided to try kind of a different technique. I just used my finger to dab on the different colors. And I had no idea what this was going to look like in the end, but it actually turned out pretty cool. Now we're going to come back with some white candy melts and our large sphere molds, and we're just going to coat each of the spheres with some of this white candy melts, and this is going to create the structure of our planets and also fill in the gaps from the colors that we put earlier. Now I did not let my colors that I splattered on earlier dry or harden completely before I put this white on, and that was sort of intentional. I wanted the colors to kind of mix together a bit because this is still a bit warm. It is melting the red and the yellow that you see here. But what you could also do is wait for those colors to harden completely and then go in with your melted white candy melts, making sure that it's not too hot. Then you'll keep all those colors separate and you won't get any marbling. It's a good idea to try and wipe up the edges before everything hardens, but we can also scrape off everything in the end. This will just help us have cleaner lines when we're popping them out and gluing them together later. Now we're going to repeat with the other sized molds, go in with the white chocolate, or as you'll see, I actually use a different background color for some of these. You can also play around with those colors, it doesn't have to be white. Another thing to keep in mind here, especially when you're doing the larger spheres, is that you don't want this shell that you're filling in now to be too thin. If you feel like it's kind of thin, you can let it harden a bit and go in with a second layer. You want to make sure it's going to hold up when we pop them out of the molds later on. Now we just want to scrape off anything that we didn't get with the paper towel earlier. And like I mentioned before, this is just going to help us get nice clean edges, which will really help when we're gluing the two halves together at the end. Once the spheres have hardened, we're going to pop them out of the molds, and since these are silicone molds, they're super easy to just push them out like this. Now what I'm doing here is I'm trying to match up halves that I think go together. This helps us stay organized and will speed up the process when we stick them together later. And it's finally time to stick them together. So you want to grab a nonstick pan and heat that up a little bit over a low heat. It doesn't need to be very hot. We just need enough warmth to melt the edges, as you can see that I'm doing here. And what happens there is you basically create kind of a glue with that melted edge. And then you can push them together and then just use your finger to go around the seam before it hardens to try and wipe off anything that may have gotten squeezed out when you put them together. Now when you're putting one half on the pan and melting it a bit, don't leave it too long. You don't want to melt it all the way down and ruin that sphere shape. Just enough to get some melted candy melts all the way around, and then stick it to its matching half. Okay, so on to the stacking and decorating. Put a little bit of frosting down on your cake board to help the cake stick to it. Grab a leveled layer of cake and place that on your cake board. Then spread some black colored frosting on top. The easiest way to get black frosting without using too much black food coloring is to make a chocolate frosting and then add a little black food coloring to it. So that's what I have here. Now we're just going to repeat stacking our cake with frosting in the middle until we use up all of our cake layers. When you're spreading out your filling on each cake layer, try to keep it level so that the next layers will also be level. This will help make the whole cake level in the end. Now we're going to do our crumb coat, which is a very thin layer of frosting around the sides and top of the cake. And the purpose of the crumb coat is to seal in all of the crumbs so that we can have a nice smooth finish to our cake. Once we finish the crumb coat, we want to put the cake in the freezer for 10 to 15 minutes. We want the surface of the cake to be really cold so we can get a nice thick layer of frosting on top. This will also help with the blending of our colors. So what you see here is the cake has come out of the freezer and we're putting our base layer of dark gray frosting on the cold cake. And we just want this to be even. It doesn't have to be super smooth at this point because we're still going to put other colors on top of it. Then once we finish that, we're going to put it back in the freezer for about 10 minutes, and then we'll start putting the colors on. So now I'm taking my colors. I have pink, blue, and purple. I'm just putting little dollops on around the cake kind of randomly. Once we have those on, we're going to take something flat. I'm using a bench scraper here. And we're basically just blending all of these colors together. The reason we wanted our cake to be so cold before we did this is so that we don't end up taking off all of the colors and some of the base gray. We want that to stay nice and firm so that we're just able to blend the colors on top of the gray. And as you can see, now I'm just repeating this process, and we're going to blend some white into this layer as well. And this gives us the galaxy effect that we're looking for. Now for the top, I'm dabbing on some of my colors, and then I'm going to take a flat spatula and blend these from the outside towards the middle. This creates kind of a swirl on the top as well. Now we get to have some fun and splatter on some stars. So I just have some melted buttercream here. If you have white food coloring, feel free to use that. That'll definitely be good here. And I'm using a small pastry brush and just dipping it in my melted buttercream and flicking it onto the cake. You can also just use your fingers and kind of flick it onto the side of the cake. I found that technique worked pretty well as well. Now for our final step, we're going to place our prepared planets on top of the cake. Now they should stick pretty well into the buttercream, but it'll definitely help if you refrigerate this cake if you're going to transport it anywhere. Then you're far less likely to have any of these planets fall off of the cake. And there you have it. Here is our buttercream galaxy cake. I did also get a picture of the inside of this cake. This is what it looks like when you cut a slice. You can see all of our beautiful marbled colors in there. If you make this cake, or if you use any of the techniques in this video, please share it with me at iliketocake.baker@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to share it in a future video. Thanks for watching!